Welcome back to the deep dive. We are absolutely thrilled to jump into the source material you've laid out for us today.
Me too. This is a really fascinating one.
It really is. We're diving into the story of a figure who built something, well, truly colossal, starting from the most humble beginnings imaginable.
You were pulling back the curtain on the mind of Phil Knight, the legendary and, often quite private figure behind Nike.
Exactly. So what we have here, as you mentioned, is this fascinating breakdown. It's essentially a look at Phil Knight's playbook for building Nike.
That's right. It's drawn from a video titled Phil Knight's $30.6B Playbook, How He Built Nike Without Investors. And it really zeroes in on the, let's say, unconventional path he took.
Definitely unconventional. And our mission today, diving into this material, isn't just to recount the history, right?
Oh, not at all.
We want to truly unpack the core principles, the mindset, the specific, often audacious strategies that took this tiny shoe business, and I mean tiny, we're talking shoes sold out of a car trunk.
Literally out of a trunk.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
And transformed it into the global empire Nike is today. We really want to dig for those essential nuggets of knowledge you can extract from his journey.
And the contrast is just.
Yeah.
It's almost unbelievable when you look at the numbers highlighted in the source. Knight started Blue Ribbon Sports, which was the original name,
Right.
with just $1,200. $1,200.
It's staggering.
And today, Nike is this behemoth,
Yeah.
generating over $51 billion in annual revenue. And according to this material, Phil Knight himself is estimated to be worth, what, $30.6 billion as of June 2025.
That jump from $1,200 to tens of billions,
That's right.
I mean, it just begs the question, how? How on earth did that happen?
Exactly. And the source frames this perfectly by telling us, look, this isn't just another dry business case study.
Right. It's more human than that.
Much more. It's fundamentally presented as a lesson in obsession, in radical discipline, and in a kind of relentless, almost stubborn persistence that, frankly, few people possess.
Yeah, it sounds less like a step-by-step manual and more about the underlying force that propelled him.
Precisely. So let's really try and dive into that force today.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning then. The origin point, the very seed of this massive idea. The source material spends quite a bit of time on Phil Knight's initial mindset, his passion, and what truly drove him beyond, just the desire for profit.
Yeah, and one of the very first most striking points is that for Phil Knight, money wasn't the end goal. It really wasn't.
That comes across strongly.
It's presented as a byproduct, maybe a necessary fuel, but definitely not the destination itself. The real driver was something much deeper, a sense of purpose linked directly to his own life.
So where did that come from? The source traces it back.
It does. It traces this back to his roots. He was apparently a pretty shy track runner, not a superstar athlete, but deeply committed at the University of Oregon.
Okay.
And his coach there was the legendary Bill Bowerman, a man who himself was obsessed with optimizing athletic performance, constantly tinkering with shoes, trying to shave off even a fraction of a second.
Ah, so the seed was planted early.
It seems so. Knight shared that obsession. His focus wasn't on getting rich. It was specifically on speed, on performance, and the equipment that enabled it. He was mirroring Bowerman's own passion, really.
So you have this intense personal connection to the world of running and performance already brewing. And then comes this really pivotal moment highlighted in the source material back in 1962.
Right. He's studying at Stanford Business School, which, isn't the typical path for a runner, but it definitely shows his intellectual side.
Yeah, it does.
And he has to write a paper, a business school paper.
And this paper is just, it's become legendary now, hasn't it?
Absolutely. The title itself is the core question that launched the entire thing. Can Japanese sports shoes do to German shoes what Japanese cameras did to German cameras?
Wow, what a question.
Think about the context. At that time, if you were serious about athletic shoes, especially running, you were probably wearing expensive imports, mostly from German brands like Adidas and Puma. They dominated the market, particularly in the U.S.
Right, they were the big players.
Meanwhile, the Japanese camera industry had recently done exactly what the question implied. They disrupted the established German camera industry by offering comparable, high-quality technology, but at a much lower price point.
Okay, so he saw this historical parallel, this disruption model playing out in one industry.
And wondered if the same dynamics could be applied to another.
Yeah.
Exactly. It wasn't just some random thought. It was this analytical observation combined with his lived experience as a runner who understood the need for good, but also affordable gear.
So he identified a clear market problem, these expensive, sometimes hard to get high-performance shoes.
Yeah, and saw an opportunity. A way to provide a solution by sourcing affordable, quality alternatives from Japan and bringing them to American runners like himself.
It feels like more than just spotting a gap in the market.
Oh, definitely. It was identifying a fundamental disconnect between price and accessibility in a sport he cared deeply about. This wasn't about chasing some fleeting trend. It was a strategic opportunity based on a real-world need he understood personally and a proven pattern of global trade disruption he'd analyzed.
That combination is powerful personal passion, market insight, and that analytical thinking from his business school days.
Really potent, yeah.
And it's fascinating how that initial mindset, born from his own needs as a runner and that strategic analysis, seems to have directly translated into the core purpose of the company later on. The source quotes Nike's enduring mission.
Which is to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world.
And to really grasp the scale of that mission, you have to include Knight's famous quote, which is also central to the source material.
One that says, if you have a body, you are an athlete.
Just think about the power of that statement. It fundamentally redefines who gets to be called an athlete.
It completely blows the definition wide open.
Yeah, it broadened the potential audience from just elite competitors and professional athletes to, well, literally everyone. Anyone who exercises, who moves, who walks, you're an athlete, according to Nike.
And you have to think, this wasn't just clever marketing. It feels like a genuine philosophical stance that democratized sports and created an immediate personal connection point for millions, probably billions of people with the brand.
It made the brand feel inclusive, right? You didn't have to be an Olympian to connect with Nike.
Exactly. You just had to believe in the value of movement, of personal effort, whatever that looked like for you. And that emotional bridge, built directly on Knight's philosophy, was incredibly significant for building the brand long-term.
And you can really see how Knight's personal, enduring passion for running continues to shape the brand's soul, even today. The source points to this recent kind of surprising trend, this #RunWithKnight thing on TikTok.
It's genuinely fascinating to watch, isn't it? You have these younger creators on TikTok, many of whom weren't even born when Knight was running the company day to day.
Right.
And they're recreating his reported morning run routine. They pair it with quotes from his memoir, Shoe Dog.
It's a real testament to how this simple, disciplined mindset and his deep connection to running still resonate, still inspire, particularly with a generation that seems to value authenticity and is maybe searching for something grounding in this, incredibly fast-paced world.
It really brings us right back to where we started with this point. The source material makes it abundantly clear that for Phil Knight, the driving force wasn't primarily about accumulating wealth.
No.
That personal, consuming passion for running, for performance, for the sport itself that was the fuel. The money, it seems, followed the mission because the mission was authentic and deeply felt.
Okay, so the seed of the idea was planted, deeply rooted in that passion and market insight. But turning that idea into a reality, especially with such minimal resources, requires navigating some serious financial hurdles.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And the source material dives deep into what's described as Phil Knight's almost precarious financial survival system in those early years.
And survival is absolutely the right word here. The source details the almost unbelievable launch back in January 1964. It was Phil Knight and his old coach, Bill Bowerman, pooling their resources.
And that grand total?
A mere $1,200. That's it. And they started under the name Blue Ribbon Sports.
Just over $1,000. You really have to put that in perspective against Nike's scale today. It just underscores how incredibly scrappy those beginnings were.
Totally scrappy. And the source paints this vivid picture. No office, no warehouse, no distribution center. The initial inventory was literally stored and sold out of the trunk of Knight's Plymouth Valiant.
Wow. Just driving around.
Yeah, he would drive to track beats, high school cross-country races, college events, basically anywhere runners gathered, pop the trunk, and start selling.
It's the absolute definition of lean and fast-moving. The focus was solely on getting the product directly to that niche customer base who would appreciate quality performance shoes.
Exactly. It was all about generating immediate cash flow from sales right there on the spot.
And despite that incredibly humble setup, they saw early traction, didn't they? The source notes they managed to pull in, what, $8,000 in revenue in that first year?
Which, coming from the trunk of a car, is pretty remarkable. That number climbed to $20,000 in the second year. But the critical point, and where Knight's unique strategy really comes in, is what he did with that early revenue.
Right, he didn't pocket it.
No. The source emphasizes that Knight reinvested every single dollar back into the business's growth. He wasn't taking a salary, apparently worked another job. He wasn't pocketing profits. All the money went straight back into ordering more shoes.
And this relentless reinvestment leads to the core of his early financial approach, which the source calls banking through inventory. It sounds risky just saying it.
Oh, it was incredibly risky, and the source confirms it.
Yeah.
It was basically a high-stakes game of timing and, frankly, trust in his ability to sell.
So explain that concept. How did banking through inventory work?
The idea was this. Knight would order shipments of shoes from his Japanese supplier, Onitsuka Tiger. They were actually larger than what he had the cash on hand to pay for at that moment.
Okay, so he was ordering on credit, essentially.
Exactly. The capital wasn't sitting in a bank account waiting for the invoice. The capital was tied up in the shoes themselves, sitting in boxes, often still in his car, or maybe a rented garage space later on.
So the clock was ticking, like, immediately from the moment that shipment arrived.
Precisely. The absolute necessity, the core of the strategy, was selling those shoes, converting that inventory into cash fast enough to gather the payment amount required to send back to Onitsuka.
Before the due date arrived for that shipment.
And, critically, before the next shipment was ready to go out or needed to be ordered, it was this constant, nerve-wracking cycle. Order, sell, pay, order, sell, pay. There was almost zero buffer.
That sounds absolutely terrifying, like living perpetually on the edge of financial collapse. What happens if sales dip for a month or a shipment is delayed?
Disaster.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the source details that this strategy, while it allowed for really rapid scaling without needing traditional bank loans or, importantly, giving away equity early on,
Which he clearly didn't want to do.
no, but it created immense constant pressure and led to multiple near-death experiences for the company, which we should definitely touch on more later. But it allowed him to acquire inventory and meet growing demand far faster than if he had waited to save up cash for each order. He was essentially leveraging the supplier's credit terms as his primary bank.
Wow. So this incredibly risky banking through inventory phase was essential for that initial burst of growth, getting them to a certain scale. But obviously that couldn't last forever.
Yeah.
What were the key moments that fundamentally changed Nike's financial game?
Well, the source highlights a few critical junctures. The name change to Nike in 1971 was symbolic, right? Establishing their own identity beyond just being an importer for Onitsuka.
A big step.
But the major financial inflection point, the game changer, was the initial public offering, the IPO, in December 1980.
Right when they went public.
Exactly. Nike started selling shares on the stock market. The source states this action instantly injected significant capital into the company. And almost overnight, it made Phil Knight a multimillionaire on paper because of the value of the shares he retained.
So that freed them from those really tight constraints of purely inventory-based financing, I guess.
To a large extent, yes. Though managing cash flow obviously remained vital for any growing company, but it gave them breathing room and resources they'd never had before.
And then, arguably the most famous financial move, one that completely reshaped the sports industry, was the Michael Jordan deal in 1984.
This was just a colossal gamble, and the source really underscores the risk involved. They committed to a $2.5 million contract for a basketball rookie
A rookie?
who hadn't even played a single professional game yet. Jordan wasn't the global icon he is today. He was a promising college player, sure, but completely unproven at the NBA level. People forget that.
So what was the payoff? The source gives a number, right?
An astonishing figure. The Air Jordan shoe line alone generated $126 million in revenue in its very first year.
$126 million from one rookie shoe line in 1 year.
Just staggering. That wasn't just an endorsement deal. It was a true partnership that basically created a new product category and a massive cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
The source points out this deal didn't just prove the power of athlete partnerships, it completely rewrote the marketing and financial playbook for the entire sports apparel industry. It showed the value wasn't just in sponsoring established stars, but in identifying future icons and building something entirely new with them.
So the financial model evolved significantly from, selling shoes out of a trunk. It became much more sophisticated, moving way beyond just manufacturing and product sales.
Absolutely. The source emphasizes that Knight quickly understood that while cash flow was the absolute lifeblood, especially early on, his strategic weapons also included storytelling and, crucially, cultural timing.
The Jordan deal is the ultimate example of that, isn't it? Perfect cultural timing meeting powerful storytelling.
Couldn't be a better example. And that's why Nike, even today, continues to heavily reinvest its capital, not just in factories or R&D, but in cultivating those deep athlete relationships, creating compelling content, and constantly building narrative around the brand.
Because, as the source quotes Knight saying,
Brands that connect emotionally grow exponentially.
that's the core insight right there, isn't it? The
Yeah.
financial success wasn't just about making a better shoe, although that was
Well,
important.
critical, yeah.
It was about building a brand that resonated on this deep emotional level. It was about what Nike represented: ambition, effort, breaking barriers, and strategically leveraging moments and figures like Jordan who embodied those values.
That emotional connection had tangible financial value. It allowed the brand to expand and generate revenue far beyond just the functional utility of its products. It really shows how the financial model was intertwined with the brand narrative right from the start, or at least very early on.
Okay, so building this company wasn't just about shrewd financial strategy, even that risky banking through inventory. It was clearly about sheer, raw grit, especially in those early years navigating that financial tightrope.
Definitely.
The source material captures this intensity by calling Phil Knight a road warrior.
And it's a really apt description. That period from 1964, when Blue Ribbon Sports started, up until 1971 when they rebranded as Nike,
Yeah,
it was just a relentless grind.
yeah.
The source highlights that Knight essentially lived a double life for years. He was working as a full-time accountant during the day.
Just to earn a steady paycheck.
Exactly, just to keep the lights on personally.
Yeah.
And then he transformed into a shoe hustler, as the source puts it, after hours and on weekends.
You just have to picture that daily reality. Balancing ledgers in some quiet office by day, and then hitting the road, driving maybe hours to some remote track meet, opening the trunk and trying to sell enough pairs of shoes to meet payroll or pay that next crucial supplier bill from Japan.
And the source really stresses the complete lack of safety nets. There was no real infrastructure to speak of initially, certainly no investors waiting to bail them out if things went south.
Right.
And that constant, sometimes desperate dependency on their sole supplier, Onitsuka, in Japan.
That dependency must have felt like a massive vulnerability.
Huge. And the source details several instances that were genuinely near-death experiences for the company because of it,
Yeah.
and other factors.
Like what?
Well, they ran out of cash multiple times, like
Mhm.
completely out, meaning they couldn't even place the next order for shoes, which was their only product at the time.
Wow. That's existential.
Totally. They also faced legal battles and got sued, draining precious time and, money they didn't really have. And critically, the source recounts the moment when Onitsuka, see how well their shoes were selling in the U.S. thanks to Knight's efforts,
Uh-oh.
tried to cut Knight out of the business entirely. They wanted to take the lucrative American market for themselves.
Any one of those things, running out of cash, losing your only supplier, a major lawsuit could have easily been fatal for a tiny company like that. How on earth did they survive all of that?
The source really attributes it to a fundamental mindset, a kind of stubborn refusal to yield that night, distilled in his memoir, Shoe Dog, he famously wrote. The cowards never started and the weak died along the way. That leaves us.
Wow. That quote, it isn't just business strategy, is it? It's almost like a creed, a declaration of this intense, almost existential commitment.
It really frames the entire venture, not just as building a business, but as a kind of battleground where only the most committed could possibly survive. It implies that the very process of enduring these hardships was a filtering mechanism, leaving only those with an absolute unwillingness to quit.
So how did he embody that day to day?
Well, the source describes how Knight embodied this by focusing relentlessly on the immediate actionable step, even when the future looked terrifyingly uncertain. He just kept moving, focusing on one shoe, one order, one runner at a time. He didn't seem to get overwhelmed by the scale of the challenges. He focused on the next small task right in front of him.
And this mindset of persistence wasn't just applied to the business struggles, right? It was deeply ingrained in his personal routine, too. The source notes his consistent habit of running almost every single morning.
Yeah. And the purpose of that run, according to the source, wasn't primarily about setting personal bests or even just physical fitness, though I'm sure that helped.
Right.
It was presented more as a mental discipline. Running cleared his mind, allowed him to process problems, stay sharp, and perhaps most importantly, it kept him viscerally connected to the company's core identity running itself. It was like a daily physical embodiment of the brand's purpose.
That's a really powerful link between the founder's personal discipline and the very soul of the company he was building. And when reflecting on what actually pushed him through those seemingly impossible challenges, the source captures his profound answer.
The quote, "I was more afraid of stopping than I was of failing."
That is such a critical psychological insight, isn't it? Failure was a constant looming possibility. Sales could drop, suppliers could cut them off, a lawsuit could ruin them. Those were external threats, things that might happen.
Right, things outside his control to some extent.
But stopping,
Right.
quitting, that was something he would have to actively choose to do. And the fear of choosing inertia, of giving up on the mission, was apparently a more powerful motivator for him than the fear of the venture simply collapsing under external pressure.
That internal fear of quitting became the engine that drove him through the fear of failure. That's quite profound.
And you can absolutely see how this relentless, almost fearful persistence became woven into the very fabric of Nike's identity. The source points out that iconic slogans like "just do it" aren't just clever marketing lines cooked up in an agency.
No, they feel authentic. They resonate so deeply precisely because they were born from this real struggle, this sweat, this fear, this absolute refusal to stop.
Right.
They are, in a way, a distillation of the company's actual lived experience in those tough early years.
And it's clearly still relevant today. The source material notes how Knight's story, particularly the slow, often painful, stubborn path described in Shoe Dog, is finding this whole new audience and inspiring creators on platforms like TikTok and YouTube Shorts.
Yeah, in a world that's often saturated with narratives of overnight success and, instant viral explosions, Knight's decades-long slog offers a really grounding counter-narrative.
Yeah.
It highlights the immense value of persistence, of discipline, and of facing resistance head on. It kind of validates the struggle that most successful ventures actually entail behind the scenes.
So the road warrior wasn't just a seller of shoes. He was someone running towards resistance, fueled not necessarily by a desire to win easily, but by this deep-seated fear of ever standing still.
That seems to capture it really well.
Okay, so as the company navigated those treacherous early years and began to scale, Phil Knight's vision clearly extended beyond just survival and growth. The source material explores his deeper philosophy about business and life, focusing on how he built profound meaning into the Nike brand itself.
Yeah, he didn't just view Blue Ribbon Sports, and later Nike, as a simple shoe company making widgets. The source says he fundamentally saw it as a cause.
A cause. What does that mean in this context?
It means it was about more than just transactions, more than selling units. It was about inspiring people, about the physical and emotional act of movement, about elevating human potential. His belief, as presented, was that business, at its best, is about building meaning, not solely about accumulating profit. Profit was necessary, sure, to keep the cause alive.
Right, the fuel.
The fuel, exactly. But the cause itself was the primary purpose.
And this philosophical foundation directly shaped the brand's communication style. The source shares another quote that really exemplifies this.
This one, "Don't tell people how to run. Inspire them to want to."
That's such a radical departure from traditional product marketing, isn't it? Which might focus on, the technical features of the shoe or specific training techniques.
Totally different. This quote highlights Nike's focus on motivation, on tapping into that internal desire and aspiration people have to be active, to push themselves. It's about connection on an emotional and inspirational level, rather than just providing instruction.
And this focus on inspiration and building meaning was apparently intertwined with the relentless pursuit of product quality and a real knack for authentic storytelling right from the very start. The source recounts the now famous waffle sole anecdote.
Ah, yes, the waffle iron story. It's a perfect, almost charming illustration of that obsession meeting ingenuity.
So tell it again. How did it go?
Well, in the early 1970s, Bill Bowerman, Knight's co-founder and the track coach, was constantly experimenting, trying to make better shoes. The story goes that he was having breakfast, looking at his wife's waffle iron,
Okay.
and had this sudden aha moment. Could that waffle pattern provide a better grip for running shoes on the new synthetic tracks being built?
So he didn't just wonder about it.
No. He apparently took the waffle iron out to his workshop and literally poured urethane, a type of rubber, into it to create a prototype sole pattern. The Force describes this not just as innovation, but as an almost obsessive hands-on drive to improve performance.
It's that blend of curiosity, passion, and just rolling up your sleeves and trying something, even if it seems a bit crazy, that seems to define their approach to the product itself. And then there's the iconic visual symbol that came out of this era, the swoosh.
An incredible story. The source tells how the swoosh was designed by a graphic design student named Carolyn Davidson back in 1971.
And her fee.
Her fee for creating what is now one of the most recognizable logos in the entire world, a mere $35.
$35. It's just mind-boggling when you think about that initial investment compared to its current estimated brand value. The source cites Interbrand valuing the Nike brand at what, $45.4 billion?
And Kantar placing it even higher at $71.6 billion.
Yeah.
Just astronomical numbers.
$35 for a symbol that now represents tens of billions in value and is instantly recognized everywhere on the planet. It speaks volumes about the power of simple, effective design, yes, but maybe even more about the
24 years. In today's world of instant gratification culture, where brands feel they need that pithy slogan and a fully formed identity practically on day one, that's an incredibly long timeline.
It really is. What does that tell us?
Well, I think it demonstrates a profound long-term vision, a willingness to let the brand's identity, its meaning, its connection with its audience mature organically through actions, through product innovation like the waffle sole, through athlete stories, before trying to capture it all in a concise phrase.
So by the time Just Do It launched,
The company had lived that struggle, that perseverance, that
Yeah.
pursuit of excellence for decades. The slogan resonated so deeply because it authentically reflected the journey and the values that were already intrinsically part of the brand's soul. It felt earned, you know.
it really did. And Phil Knight himself played a crucial role in shaping this brand soul, often, as we mentioned, not by being its public face, but by deliberately staying out of the spotlight. The source describes him as fiercely private.
Very private. Rarely giving interviews, rarely seeking personal fame or the limelight.
And his reasoning for that, according to the source, was quite strategic, wasn't it?
Yeah, he believed the athletes were the heroes, not the CEOs. By staying in the background, he ensured that the narrative remained focused squarely on athletic achievement, on the inspiring stories of the runners, the basketball players, the track and field stars who wore Nike. He didn't want his own personality to overshadow the individuals who actually embodied the brand's ideals of striving and performance.
He let the athletes be the conduits for the brand's meaning. That makes sense. And as Nike scaled up, got bigger and bigger, he focused intensely on protecting this core identity, this soul he'd so carefully built.
Yes, the source notes that the internal culture he fostered aimed to protect creativity, to celebrate smart risk-taking like that early Jordan gamble we talked about, and to prioritize marketing that focused on achieving emotional resonance over just chasing immediate sales ROI.
He didn't want Nike to be just a loud, aggressive sales machine.
No. He wanted it to be something people felt, something that inspired them from within.
That's a really powerful distinction, aiming to be felt rather than just heard. It highlights the immense importance he placed on that intangible connection the brand had with its audience, and ensuring that core value system remained intact as the company grew exponentially.
A huge challenge as companies scale, but one he seemed very focused on.
Okay, so he painstakingly built this brand with deep meaning and a distinct soul, often working quietly behind the scenes. That brings us perfectly to the final part of his playbook that the source explores: how he managed to maintain control and influence, ensuring that his vision and that brand soul were protected, even as Nike became this massive, publicly traded, global behemoth.
Right.
The source appropriately labels him the architect behind the curtain.
It's a very fitting image, I think. As the source emphasizes repeatedly, Knight consistently shied away from personal celebrity. His power came not from being the public face of Nike, but from being the strategic architect, pulling the strings, guiding the overall direction, and safeguarding those core principles he'd established from the very beginning.
And he was incredibly shrewd about maintaining that control, wasn't he? Especially even after the company went public with its IPO in December 1980. That's often the point when founders lose significant control as ownership gets dispersed among public shareholders.
Exactly. That's the common story. But the source details how Knight employed a specific, very deliberate legal mechanism to prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
He used a special ownership vehicle called Swoosh LLC.
Swoosh LLC. Okay, what did that do?
This legal structure essentially allowed him and his family to retain a vast majority. The source says approximately 98% of Nike's Class A voting shares.
98% of the shares that actually determine who's on the board and control the strategic direction of the company. So even though billions of dollars worth of Class B shares, the ones most people buy and sell, were trading publicly, giving people a financial stake, Knight held on to the actual reins of power.
Absolutely. It was a masterstroke in corporate governance, really. The source confirms that even decades later, as of June 2025 filings, he and his family still hold over 23.8 million of those Class A voting shares. alongside a significant number of Class B shares, too.
So this wasn't just about personal wealth, it was fundamentally about maintaining profound long-term governance control.
Precisely. It was a deliberate strategy to ensure the company couldn't be easily taken over by corporate raiders or forced by short-term market pressures to compromise the values and the long-term vision he believed were essential to Nike's soul.
He wasn't just building a company, he was building an institution with a very specific identity, and he structured the ownership deliberately to protect that institution's soul. Even when he transitioned in 2016, stepping down from the chairman role and passing it to Mark Parker, he didn't just disappear entirely, did he?
No, not at all. The source notes he remained chairman emeritus. This position allowed him to step back from the day-to-day operational grind, granting Parker full leadership, but still retain an influential voice on strategic direction and, crucially, continue to act as a guardian of brand soul, as the source puts it.
Right.
He could still weigh in on major decisions that affected Nike's identity and purpose.
And you can still feel his influence, or at least the influence of that philosophy, in key moments that define Nike's cultural impact, even now. The source points to things like the revival campaigns for Just Do It, making sure that core message stays relevant.
And a particularly significant example highlighted is his personal approval, even as chairman emeritus, of the controversial but incredibly impactful 2018 Colin Kaepernick Dream Crazy ad.
Yeah, that was a moment that generated intense public reaction, both positive and negative. For Knight, even in that emeritus role, to personally sign off on a campaign that was absolutely guaranteed to spark such debate.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It really does. It speaks volumes about his and the company's commitment to Nike standing for something bold and purpose-driven, even if it carries significant commercial risk.
The source kind of frames this willingness to embrace such campaigns as purpose-driven marketing becoming Nike's global edge. It ties right back to his fundamental belief that the brand needed to mean something, to inspire, and sometimes that means taking a stand or aligning with individuals who embody courage and push boundaries, even if it's controversial.
So it's a strategic calculation, then, about long-term resonance.
It seems so. A calculation about the long-term resonance and loyalty gained from connecting with certain values, despite the potential short-term backlash you might get from others.
And this combination, Knight's enduring vision, that strategic control he maintained, and the willingness to embrace purpose, continues to fuel Nike's immense cultural influence in the modern digital landscape.
Oh, the scale is just truly massive now. The source highlights the sheer reach, mentioning over 325 million Instagram followers just across their various athlete ambassadors alone. Think about the cumulative impact of that network.
It's enormous.
And the way Nike leverages platforms like TikTok, initiating viral challenges like the hashtag #JustDoA challenge or hashtag #RunWithNike, they really know how to engage.
And they've expanded their cultural footprint far beyond just sports now, haven't they? Through all these cross-industry collaborations, working with major artists on sneaker designs, partnering with gamers, even engaging with mental health initiatives.
Exactly. The source makes the crucial point that Nike isn't just selling shoes or apparel anymore. It's a genuine cultural force. It moves conversations, it shapes trends, it influences identity on a global scale.
And much of that power,
According to the source, stems right back to Knight's initial vision of building a cause, not just a company, and his deliberate strategies to maintain control and protect that vision's integrity over decades. That image of the quiet man who started running at sunrise to clear his head still, in a very real sense, seems to run the brand's spirit and strategic direction today.
it's a really powerful demonstration of how a founder's vision, when it's meticulously protected and nurtured, can have an enduring, maybe even amplifying effect on a company's cultural presence and its identity long after that founder is no longer involved in the daily operations.
A lasting legacy for sure.
So we've taken this deep dive, moving all the way from that $1,200 startup selling shoes literally from a car trunk,
Incredible.
all the way to this multi-billion-dollar global empire that actively shapes culture. Based on all the source material we've explored today, it's clear Phil Knight didn't just build a business. He crafted a kind of timeless blueprint.
Yeah, a blueprint with lessons that really seem to transcend the shoe industry. The source helpfully consolidates these into 6 core takeaways drawn directly from his path and his philosophy.
Okay, let's quickly run through them. First up, start small, think huge.
Right, it's the $1,200 origin story writ large. You don't necessarily need massive funding to begin. You need a compelling why. A vision that extends far beyond whatever humble starting point you have. The scale came later because the ambition was always outsized from the start.
Makes sense. Second, don't chase money, chase obsession.
Money followed Knight's singular obsession with running, with performance, with making better shoes. The source really shows how that passion wasn't just personal fuel. It was the strategic engine that made the company relentless and, crucially, authentic.
Third, build slow, build soul.
The 24 years it took for Just Do It to launch is the prime example here. You build something lasting, something meaningful, something with real soul, through patience, through lived experience, allowing the brand's identity to develop authentically over time, not forcing it.
Number 4, turn pain into power.
We talked about the numerous crises, the cash shortages, the lawsuits, the supplier betrayal. Knight didn't just survive these setbacks. The source suggests he almost seemed to draw energy from them, using resistance as fuel to push even harder.
Fifth, control the vision, protect the brand.
His use of Swoosh LLC to maintain that voting control after the IPO, it wasn't about ego. It was presented as a deliberate mechanism to shield the company's long-term direction and core values from those external short-term market pressures. He prioritized the integrity of the brand's soul above all else.
And finally, sixth, make your brand mean something.
Yeah. Nike isn't just a logo on athletic gear. It clearly stands for something bigger: ambition, courage, belief, pushing limits, unlocking athletic potential. The source argues that this deep-seated meaning is precisely why the brand resonates so powerfully, why it endures, and why it continues to shape culture and trend globally.
Those are powerful lessons, and reflecting on the nature of risk and progress, the source includes Phil Knight's own words on mistakes.
Yeah, the quote, "The trouble in America is not that we are making too many mistakes, but that we are making too few."
That's a truly provocative thought, isn't it? It suggests that risk, potential failure, experimentation, making mistakes isn't just acceptable. It's actually a necessary ingredient for growth and innovation.
His own journey certainly embodied that. It wasn't characterized by playing it safe or fearing failure itself. Not at all.
No, as the source compellingly concludes, his ultimate fear wasn't actually failing. It was never trying.
Right. It was fearing stopping, fearing inertia. And that specific mindset, that relentless forward-moving drive, is ultimately what allowed Nike to transcend being just a company that sells shoes and become a global mindset and inspiration in itself.
Phil Knight's journey, as laid out in the source material, is just a powerful, often gritty testament to the impact of a singular vision, relentless persistence through unimaginable challenges, and that conscious effort to build something with genuine, enduring meaning.
It really offers incredible insight into the kind of dedication and strategic thinking required to build something truly monumental. It demonstrates how focusing on purpose and resilience can help overcome what often seem like insurmountable financial and operational hurdles.
It really forces you to think about the different kinds of fear that can drive us or, halt us in our tracks. The fear of failing, of things not working out, that's real for everyone.
Of course.
But maybe the deeper, more debilitating fear, as Knight seemed to feel, is that of never even attempting, of stopping before you start, or maybe giving up too soon. So, as you reflect on your own goals, your own pursuits, whatever they might be, big or small, maybe ask yourself, which fear is more potent for you? Are you more afraid of stumbling along the way, or are you more afraid of not trying at all?
Yeah. And consider that thing you're genuinely obsessed with, that purpose that really resonates with you. How might you start building something around that, even on the smallest scale, that has genuine soul and meaning, first for yourself and then potentially for others?
What's just one tangible step you could take towards that vision? Maybe even today, just like Phil Knight selling that very first pair of shoes from his trunk,
Mhm.
One shoe, one step at a time.